Talking about what policies we want to put in place, why we want to put those policies in place, what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. So I want to talk to you today about disaster recovery. And you know, you've seen plenty of sessions this week probably about disaster recovery and how disaster recovery is not quite the same old story. Let's see if this is actually working. This is disaster recovery from when I was growing up. You know, hurricanes, hurricanes, floods, fire, you know, all that we think about normally when we talk about a disaster. And we have man-made disasters. I don't know if any of you were around when UUNet, which was running the northeastern section of the United States' internet, had a backhoe incident. Now they had backups and they had backup machines and they had fault-tolerant machines, but it just so happened that the machine that, or the network cable that ran the whole northeastern part of the U.S. got cut. And they couldn't exactly plan for that, right? Nowadays they can. So, you know, traditional disaster recovery, we worry about things like, you know, citizen satisfaction. We worry about what happens if your constituents can't actually get the information. You know, we deal with how to reduce downtime, how to access data and facilities and people, and basically do the day-to-day job, okay? And most agencies have got figured out, assuming there's a budget, right? Budget, that key word. And we know how to do this, right? No problem. So it's all solved and we can kind of go home, right? Well, no. Now that we've figured out those disasters, we have a whole new world of other disasters we have to worry about. Cyber disasters. The session before mine was on cyber disasters and recovery and talking about things that need to be thought out for business continuity. Okay? So we've seen a whole bunch of this. You know, and normally with the cyber disaster, we worry, did they reformat the hard drive? Okay, well, okay, so we don't worry about that so much anymore. We worry about PCI data, or HIPAA, or personally identifiable information. Does anyone, without raising your hands or indicating, has anyone had any PII issues? Now, if you have a PII issue, what do? You send out a letter to 1 million plus people. It's a death of a million little cuts. How much does it cost to send out a letter to every constituent out there saying, we're sorry, someone hacked into our system and your information might have been lost? It's relatively expensive and it's painful in terms of credibility and all the rest of that stuff. You have other interesting things going on that you might not realize. You know, when we talk about government entities, we typically think about our own government entities and the stuff that's there. The new European Data Protection Act becomes very interesting because now all of a sudden, if you have a European citizen doing something in the US, they're asserting territorial jurisdiction, so if you have to do something with their information or their information leaks, you're supposed to comply with their laws. I'm not sure this really works in the real world, but guess what? They can put it on paper, they can write it, and they could say this is the thing that's important. Not really sure how to enforce it, but we know how to handle all this stuff, right? So we can kind of go home and we're done. We can do backups to get, you know, prevent data getting destroyed. We can do restoration. We just pray that the malware wasn't intelligent malware with a time delay, so it sat around for 6 months to a year before it delivered its payload, because then when you do the restoration, you've clobbered it with your backup tapes and it reinfects you. We know how to protect data, encryption. You know, up until about 4 years ago, 5 years ago, I didn't think most people in the US could spell the word encryption. And it's great. We all know about encryption. We all know about advanced encryption standards. We all know about, you know, what to use and what to look for, right? So we can go home because we've got all this wrapped, right? Well, maybe, maybe not. Verizon investigative report, the Verizon breach. Verizon's actually out there. They've got copies of the breach report with them. This number here should be going down because we know how to deal with cyber breaches, right? Are you all still awake? Yes, good. Okay, we know how to deal with cyber breaches. So these numbers should be going down, but they're really not. And this is just for federal networks where they're very closely scrutinizing stuff. In theory, we can prevent anything that happened yesterday by just upgrading the software, patching the software, changing some of our rules and that sort of stuff. But the problem is the cyber disasters are evolving. They're evolving with the speed with which we change our infrastructure, the way we modify the way we're doing business. If you had asked me 10 years ago, can I bring my personal computer into work? What's my answer? No. Exactly. And now it's please do, because we can reduce the cost of doing business. But sometimes we forget about all the things that go on. Like, is the software on that computer licensed for a business environment or a government environment or an education environment? Okay, so we forget about those things, but we really do need to worry about it. But more importantly, what happens if they've got malware on their computer? How does that affect us? They're now on the soft and gooey, chewy side of our environment. So if we look at the exposures, I'm going to apologize for a second. This is a little bit of an eye chart. This is off of the Pricewaterhouse report, U.S. State of the Cybercrime. It's all on the slides. You guys can pull it down later. You'll see that banking and finance, 20% of the people said there were no incidences. U.S. government, no incidents, 16%. Healthcare actually didn't say they didn't have any incidences. I'm not sure whether or not I should be worried, because these no incidences tell me they're either missing it or they're not connected. If they're not connected, then I'm happy, because that means that they probably didn't have an incident, as long as someone didn't bring a computer in from home and all the rest of that stuff, right? So the question at the end of the day is your agency going to be exposed? And based on these numbers, there's a chance you were exposed. So if we look at public sector, 34% of the incidences were accidents. Insider misuse was 24%, crimeware 21%, 19% was lost and stolen. Lost and stolen. I stuck the information on a USB stick and someone stole it. I had the laptop in the trunk of my car where it wasn't visible, and someone popped the trunk because I was in a rental car and stole my information. Those are the most embarrassing. But if you look at it, 92% of the incidents were over a 10-year period were fitting into those basic policy things. Okay? If you take crimeware and lost and stolen assets, because crimeware basically says, I'm not going to let you get access to your information. Anyone not familiar with crimeware nowadays? It's a buzzword that came up like about a year ago. Everyone's familiar with it. Good. I'm going to infect your computer with something that's going to lock you from your data, because it's going to use strong encryption. We know that word too. Firewalls are good. They're proactive if you know what to look for. So if someone's coming in and trying to do something bad, well, then you can tell what's going on. Otherwise, it's purely reactive. Break out the log files. If we look at the accidental loss, misdelivery, including phishing, accidental is something that happens. Reality mode, I accidentally type in a mail message and it goes to someone else because my mail package auto-completes. No one's had that happen, right? Okay, just making sure. The other thing, though, is the government numbers may seem a little bit high because government agencies tend to over-report. We think this happened. We're better off saying it happened just in case it did happen, and this way people don't get upset. What do you get more upset about? Being told something might have happened, or not being told something happened and it did happen? And all of a sudden your credit card information or your social security number or your information's out on the street and you have no idea and no way to protect yourself. So if you think about it, misuse and errors, they're really personally identifiable information loss, right? And said to the tone of Marsha, 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 PII, 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 there is much more to the information that can be lost than just PII. You can lose bid specs, planning. What happens if you decide you're going to go and you're going to put a road through someplace and that information leaks? Either you get a protest or someone else goes out and tries to buy the property. Not necessarily a good thing. School redistricting. From agencies' points of view, what will cause more grief? a school redistricting, while you're thinking about it and it leaks out, all of a sudden all the constituents get very upset. They show up at meetings, they create meetings, they go, hey guys, we're upset, you're going to do this, and then they start talking about tax impact and everything, and you haven't even had a chance to really think it through, but the information gets out. Big contract information. You're bidding on a contract, or someone's bidding for you to do a contract, and that information leaks. And what happens? Now all of a sudden the people who lost go and appeal and they complain. It's very painful. It's embarrassing. Okay? So you got to worry about not PII data as well. Okay? Internal malicious, is really tough to find. It's not traversing a firewall. It's not facing any of our backward things. It may not be caught by a SIM. Lots of people think SIMs are log analysis, but SIMs are much more than log analysis. Got to keep that in mind. The person might have legitimate privileges. And how would you get caught in a SIM or by a log analysis if they're doing their regular job? Probably not. So the current solutions today may be tough to find if the person's on the chewy gooey inside of the system. The bottom line is failure to meet secrecy requirements plus failure to comply with legislative requirements equals failure. And when government agencies fail, you have a far worse issue than a business. A business, there's a hidden money, there may be some loss in income, the CEO might get fired. I think Target the CEO got fired. In government agencies, you lose credibility, you lose the trust of the population, which equates to far more bad things, in my mind, than just getting fired from being a CEO. You lose customer satisfaction, customer trust. So if we look at 2014's disasters, changes in web portal attacks. Okay, it used to be I attacked your web portal and I put a funny saying up, I put a face on it, said your web portal's been hacked. That's changed. Crimeware. Last year, I saw more crimeware last year than I had seen in the previous 5 years. Insider threats, of course we know about insider threats. Yesterday's world, when the web portal got hacked, they modified the GUI. Today's attack, they're going to actually go and steal the web portal, shut down your web portal, and impersonate your web portal because your certificate has been copied. Okay? Bad things happen. What happens if someone impersonates your web portal and they think it's real and they enter all their data on your portal? Well, someone else's portal. Not a good thing. When we talked disaster recovery today, or yesterday, we were saying, oh yeah, the machine got hacked, we just restored it from backup and we set it up again. Great. What about the vulnerability that allowed the initial hack? Okay, we're going to patch. That covers that. What about the loss of the certificate? Did you remember to invalidate the digital certificate? Hopefully, because if not, you now have rogue sites running around that are you. Crimeware. Yesterday was drive-by injection. You go out to a website. We've all been to websites and you click on it and everything starts popping up and everything, right? Anyone not ever had that? Y'all still awake? Yes, okay, good, just making sure. One thing, don't go to those sites, but in reality, nowadays, it's not going to just pop up nuisance buttons. It's going to infect your machine with crimeware. It's going to go and it's going to try to reformat the hard drive or put stuff on the hard drive so it encrypts your entire hard drive. Not necessarily a good thing, okay? Look at tomorrow's attack. How many of you have ever heard of the Angelo virus? Okay, you all have. The interesting thing about that virus, the unique thing about that virus was that it was set to trigger at a specific time and date. Luckily, most of the crimeware nowadays goes off right when it gets there. Imagine you have crimeware though, and it triggers on a specific date. So now it's not just your machine, but it's every machine you've been to in your infrastructure gets hit. And you pull out those backup tapes that were from last week and what? Well, guess what? The crimeware is there. So you pull up the previous set of backup tapes from 2 weeks ago. Guess what? Still there. It is getting worse. So the problem is when someone hacks into a system, the insider is not an anomaly. They're there as a legitimate user. They can insert malicious code, they can do lots of bad things. Everyone recognizes him, right? insider, privileged, got passwords from other users who were legitimate users, got lots of data, and then what he did with the data, that doesn't really matter. He was inside. It would have been very, very difficult to find him if you just did like log analysis. You know, oh yeah, he went and did this. Oh, this legitimate user over here did that. Not easy to find, okay? So just as the threats are evolving, so are the protections. Great idea, someone came up with this. They put a barricade over here to stop people from driving through. Good technology, okay? But the goal was to get inside through the road, and therefore you have that. When we put in security processes for disaster recovery, we need to make sure that people have not gone around those processes and caused us issues. Okay? So when we talk about malicious, if we take the 24% internal, it appears worse because nothing really hits my firewall. And the number really is internal, 24% plus external, because once inside, you can't necessarily detect who's doing what, especially if they've got a legitimate user and that legitimate user's privileged. That's why APT becomes so devastating. You know, it's a legitimate user doing legitimate things internally, which are reasonable for what they're doing, maybe. So we've got to rethink our defense in depth when we're looking at disaster recovery. It's not after the fact that we should be looking at disaster recovery, but before the fact. Pay attention to what we deploy, how we deploy it, where we deploy it. Defense in depth, elements really good. Firewall, outside SIM, IDM, identity solution, malware protection, application management, and files. And if you think about it, this is what we normally build. Each layer has defenses. And once you get through, then you're into the soft GUI, but if you have multiple components, no surprise, you're okay. One thing to remember when we're talking prevention, SIMs work very well. A SIM is different from a log analysis. Log analysis is part of it. SIMs look in real time at access, what are things going on. They tie into other things as well, okay? Log files, for the most part, they're after the fact. They're great for after the fact, but who wants to go through disaster recovery? You don't. You want to go through disaster prevention, right? Anyone would rather recover than prevent? Less money, less aggravation, right? And automatic capture of this information does not equal knowledge and analysis. So what's common to the threats that we've talked about? Active, persistent, insiders, accidental disclosure, the actors and the identity. What can the person be doing, and what are they normally doing, and what have they normally done? So can you use that as a warning system? Can you sit there and say, Michael, going to access this file, he's never accessed before. Should that raise a flag? Should that say, wait a minute, why are you trying to access this, or should it just allow the access? It's your choice, it's your decision, it's something that you should think about. So if we have an actor identity, we know what they should be doing, when they should be doing, how they should be doing it, where they should be doing it, that sort of stuff. So if all of a sudden John logs into the machine that Michael always logs into, and John has never logged in there before, that would be a red flag, right? And the fact that John was trying to log in on that facility or that computer may raise a flag. So if you're going to do active identity, you have to have certain requirements. You know, you've got to be proactive. Laser's not clicking on. You've got to have real-time monitoring tools. You've got to know what's normal behavior, which means you've got to record the information and build up a statistical database of what is reasonable, what's normal, okay? And it's got to have cross-agency context. Just because Michael over here is doing this doesn't mean anything bad's happening, but if Michael is going to another facility through an internal communication channel, not like anyone's ever connected, that could be a problem, okay? Any changes to the system should be monitored and or prevented. The only people who should change the system are authorized people. You know, so if now all of a sudden you see that Michael's machine has a new version of Excel on it, I should never be able to rewrite Excel, right? Why should I, or be able to change my Excel or my Word package? Not if it's run by the central process, okay? So if we think about an identity-powered security, it's got to, of course, be simple to use. If it's too hard to use, of course, then no one's going to use it. It should mitigate existing SIMs integrate into existing SIMs and stuff like that. So the bottom line is we start talking about using identity as a disaster recovery process, or actually prevention tool. Okay. I mean, think about it, crimeware. How often have you rewritten the boot sector on your hard drive? Anyone out there? Once a week, right? Yes, you do it regularly, you just rewrite the hard drive? No. Okay, reality is you don't do that. So now all of a sudden you see yourself, or someone, you go to try and rewrite the boot sector, you block the boot sector right and say, wait a minute, Michael, are you really trying to reformat your hard drive? Or you don't tell me, you just stop me from doing it and send a note off to the information technology team, right? So we can go home, right? Because we've got it all solved. We'll just tie identity-powered solutions into the disaster recovery process and we're good, right? Yes? No, we're not. As we change the way we do things, we need to rethink our threat models, which means we need to replan our disaster recovery or disaster prevention methodologies. How many of you pay attention to the software that's installed on your computers? How many of you are, okay, most of you, good. You kind of do, and you'll run some pen tests against it. If I say Nessus, does anyone not know what Nessus is? It's a scanner. It says what might be wrong with your computer. If you're really gung-ho, you might run Metasploit, which says, oh, this has been a weaponized attack, and it'll run against your computer. But we all look at the software at a given point in time before we install it to see if there's a security vulnerability, okay? But what about the third-party components that are inside there? Anyone ever hear of Heartbleed? The OpenSSL vulnerability that was released back a couple of months ago, followed up by 5 more vulnerabilities, followed up by 8 more vulnerabilities. We're not only just beginning, there's a whole bunch of stuff coming down the pipe. It's inside your third-party components, which are embedded in the products or systems that you've got in place. Okay? So you're going to have to, as part of your disaster recovery analysis, you're going to have to start monitoring, see what's there, what will be there, when it will be there, that sort of stuff. Cyber weapons. Okay. Good news is we passed some laws recently and regulations that make it illegal to have tools that stealth themselves and exfiltrate data, and also there's some regulations out there now that makes it illegal to sell them outside the country. But they're getting worse. The cyber recon tools are getting out there. Nessus, Metasploit, things like that to tell what's going on your system. If you're not running these tools in your environment, you really should be. That's the key word. The bad news is if you run them in your system, you may find that you crash part of your system. So you want to do it in a test system before you deploy as opposed to after you deploy. It's funny, one of the things I do a lot of is talking to legislators about making laws that make sense and are effective. If we say that we could do away with all the cyber recon stuff and make it so criminals don't have the cyber recon tools, which means they won't assert against us, and that'll work really well if they're just in the US, right? The problem is that there's so many other groups that use these cyber recon tools that you'll harm them. Software manufacturers, for example, we use them all the time to make sure that we don't introduce a vulnerability into a product we're selling. People buying our software run them all the time to make sure that we don't introduce a vulnerability into the product we're selling. Researchers run them just to make sure that there's nothing that's snuck in open source or third-party components that they're not necessarily knowing about. What about the Internet of Things? Anyone hear of that thing? This is going to change your threat model immensely. I mean, think about it. How many of you have Nest thermostats in your house? Anyone? No one? Good. What happens if someone goes across the internet and changes the temperature in your house to 120 degrees? What happens when the fire sensors in your house are tied into the dispatch for the fire department and every other block, or every other building on a block has a fire, or a building on each and every other block has a fire. What do you think that would do to your infrastructure? What if there was no real fire, but you just dispatched the fire trucks? We've all seen on TV where someone will hack into the traffic light grid and they'll turn the lights red. Yesterday there was a big news story that went out about remote access in cars. Forget about turning the traffic lights red, let's just hit the gas pedal for people. There's actually a fairly interesting book out where someone hacks into a satellite, and it's all science fiction, right? They hack into the satellite and they reprogram the tank, the presidential vehicle, and they basically say, oh, make a right turn here, because they hacked the GPS system. Well, sounds like pure fiction, but when your computer's tied to GPS and you've got smart cars that can figure out where they're going and whether or not they're on the road or off the road and all this other stuff, this whole threat process is going to change. And the model's going to change, and the decisions that you make will have to change. My favorite was 6 months ago, there was a big thing in the paper about zombie refrigerators, people that have refrigerators online, which I'm trying to figure out why those refrigerators are on the internet to begin with, but they were online. And someone hacked into them because they had just a little Android operating system in it, and they were sending out spam. Imagine if your facility was attacked by 1 million refrigerators. New meaning to anonymous, huh? So, you all thought that I was going to sit here and talk about distributed denial of service and what you could do about that. Toxic clouds of bits and bytes coming down, ringing death to you and destruction, and that wasn't the next big issue. That isn't going to be the next big issue. What's going to be the next big issue is disaster recovery needs to go from disaster recovery to disaster prevention. As a takeaway, be afraid of the simple things. Oh yeah, we'll let you get your email on your phone because it's your phone and we're not going to pay your phone bill and we don't have to worry about replacing it, right? And then you lose your phone or you leave it in the cab. New York City has a statistic of about 30-some-odd thousand phones found every year in cabs. I can tell it's really true because there's so many of them that are sold on eBay. Phone found in cab on eBay, no, never mind. Bad humor. Be afraid of the simple things. Just because it doesn't look harmful doesn't mean it can't be. And for those of you who can't see, someone did up this backhoe to look like a giraffe. Questions? Are y'all still awake? I know this is right before lunch and I'm talking really fast to not bore you. Yes?
One thing that I might add to your defensive depth that I've always considered one of the primary tools that you have in your tool bag is user education, awareness training, security training.
Yeah, the comment was, one of the tools I didn't put on the slide was user education, security training, user awareness. Lots of places have user awareness training, policy awareness refreshing, all this stuff. And yeah, we need to do it, but we need to keep that up to date as well. Teaching people about the same user awareness training that you did last year and the year before, and everyone can stand there and just repeat it, is interesting. But you've got to pay attention to the emerging threats. What's coming down the pipe? Hooking in all this foreign equipment into your infrastructure may cause a problem. Allowing people to access your infrastructure, depending on the depth of the access, could cause a problem. Cross-aggregation of information causes a problem. Anyone here know who Matt Honan is? Matt Honan is an editor for Wired magazine. He got hacked about 2 years ago. And they hacked him because they wanted to break into his Twitter account. So what they did is they went Twitter account and they said, oh, wait a minute. His emergency reset password goes to a me.com account, and his username is m***n@me.com. Matt Honan, what could his username possibly be? Okay. They then figured out, well, in order to get to his me.com account, they needed the last 4 of his credit card and his address. Google is a great tool for finding out where people live. They also took a chance and said, well, wait a minute, Amazon allows me to look up the password or change the password if I have the last four of the credit card number and my name and address, right? But if I want to add a credit card number, it just wants my name and my address. No problem. Let me go get a credit card number, run it fake, add it to his Amazon account, then log in, change his password on his Amazon account, get the old credit card number, log into his me.com account, issue the change request password to the me.com account because I now have credit card number and this other stuff. And now let me go to Twitter and change my password there and take over his Twitter handle. So the point is, this sounds long and convoluted, but as you do relationships with groups, you have to worry about that as well as part of your threat model, your disaster recovery plan. What are you sending? Where are you sending? How do you know it's real? How do you know it's legitimate? Thanks for pointing that out, though. But training is important, and training to look beyond what you're doing. A plus B does not always equal C. Other questions, comments?
So on you talked about cyber recon tools and things like that. So some of us that are interested in that, and we have we can purchase things like that. But on the flip side, do you have to have personnel that's capable of running that too? Is it just putting tools in place and it just sort of monitors things, or do you have to have experienced, capable people on the other end to sort of see what's happening?
So the question was, the cyber recon tools are great, but do you need someone who understands what's going on them? So I used to write all my own tools. I come from a low-level operating system background. I got started in computers doing operating system work, so bits and bytes. About 4 years ago, I got tired of writing some tools, and I saw that there was a certified ethical hacking class, which is nothing more than a, here are all the tools, this is how you run them. And I was surprised there are lots of tools out there, and they were made idiot-proof. So, a lot of what I did in terms of writing became superfluous. The tools nowadays, you run them, and it comes up and says, this may have a vulnerability. Now, running the tool is not hard. It'll tell you, this may have this vulnerability, but it's up to you to look at your infrastructure and the threat model associated with your infrastructure to see if that threat's realizable. Okay, so it's not necessarily the knowledge of the tool that's the difficult thing, it's the analysis of the report to know whether or not what it's saying is real or not. For example, if I've got a machine and it's not hooked up to the internet, do I have to worry about a worm? Probably not. And the impact of a worm, probably not. So if I run the thing and it says, oh yes, there's a heartbleed vulnerability on it, but I'm not hooked up to a network, do I care? Good question. Another question on the back.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't realize that, you don't have to have the expertise analysis. You can go out and contract for it. You can have somebody do your analysis for you and provide you with those reports to tell you exactly, in plain English, what's wrong.
Yeah, you can always hire a consultant to run the reports and then do the analysis. I always prefer to hire the consultant to do the analysis on the back end side, because anyone can run these reports. I mean, a 13-year-old kid could run these reports at this point. Script kiddies, I used to present a chart that said, you've got different levels of expertise. You've got the kid who's got 72 hours a day and loaded up on Starbucks or caffeine of some form, has plenty of time to go and play and play and play and play and play and play. The student may catch a nugget of some information and extrapolate on that. Then you've got a researcher, and then you've got the professional, and then you've got spies and terrorists. But the reality of the matter is the bar has changed over the past 8 years, so that a 14-year-old kid could issue a denial of service because they've got the tools. A 14-year-old kid could run a recon against your system just by running a scan. Okay? You can run these scans, is my point. They're very, very simple to run. The analysis is where you hire the consultant. The scan might take 2 days. The analysis might take, a week of time. Good point. Other questions, comments? I know I'm right before lunch, so I tried to speak very fast. thoughts? Was this what y'all were expecting? Is this useful information, or was it kind of like, it was entertaining? He didn't juggle or do magic tricks. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.